Here's for question number 1, how respiration relates to voice production. Before inhalation, the diaphragm and the intercostal muscles, they are relaxed, and the air pressure in the lungs are equals outside pressure. So the air in the lungs and the air outside are equal before inhalation. During breathing, which is the breathing is the power mechanism for speech. So it provides energy for the sound that we produce. There are 2 phases of respiration, which include inhalation and exhalation. During inhalation, we have our diaphragm that contracts, and when it contracts, it moves down. Then we have muscles that are involved in inhalation, which are the intercostal muscles, and they contract, which causes the rib cage to move upward. The thoracic cavity involved in inhalation, it gets bigger, and the lungs inflate, so they fill up with air, and air pressure within the lungs decreases, and air flows positively into our lungs. When it comes to exhalation, our diaphragm, which was tensed and moves down during inhalation, now relaxes and moves back up into its right position, and the intercostal muscles are now relaxed. When in inhalation, they are contracted. Then our rib cage moves down. The thoracic cavity, it gets smaller, which means that it decreases its volume, and the lungs deflate, which there are no longer air in it. And the air pressure in the lungs increases, and air pressure, it goes out of the lungs. Question number 2, the necessary and sufficient conditions for phonation. 1 is the adduction of the vocal folds. 2 is medial compression. 3 is longitudinal tension. And 4 is phonatory threshold. And these are the 4 conditions needed for phonation. I briefly discussed number 3, which is the function of each intrinsic muscle, when I was describing and pointing out the structures in my larynx model, but I will reiterate. So the interarytenoid muscle and the lateral cricoarytenoid muscles both adduct the vocal folds, which means that they go together. The posterior cricoarytenoid muscle abducts the vocal folds. The thyroarytenoid muscle, it relaxes the vocal folds. In the cricothyroid, which is the pars oblique and the pars recta, they lengthen and tense the vocal folds, which can also change the pitch in our voice. Question number 4, which is to describe how the cartilages move relative to each other and the effect each may have on the vocal folds and the voice. Starting with the arytenoids. The arytenoids rotate and rock on the cricoid cartilage, and they slide towards one another as well. The vocal process, it provides attachment for the vocal ligament, and the muscle process will provide an attachment for the cricoarytenoid muscles. With the thyroid and the cricoid cartilages, they both can rock back and forth, and and it can change the pitch. The cricoid, it articulates with the arytenoid cartilages. Question number 5, which is to describe the nerve supply to the intrinsic muscles. So I'll start by saying that all of the intrinsic muscles of the larynx are innervated by the recurrent laryngeal branch of the vagus nerve. All except for the cricothyroid muscle, which is innervated by the superior laryngeal nerve, which is part of the external laryngeal branch. Question number 6, the myoelastic aerodynamic theory of phonation, and to describe how the myoelastic components of the phonatory mechanism, to describe the myoelastic components of the phonatory mechanism, and then discuss how phonation is facilitated by the aerodynamic components. The myoelastic aerodynamic model describes the voice production as a combination of muscle force, tissue, air pressure, and how it flows. With the myoelastic aerodynamic theory of phonation, we have medial compression that holds the vocal folds together at the midline, and then air pressure below the vocal folds, which is the subglottal pressure, it begins to increase. When the air pressure becomes strong enough, or there's enough air pressure, there is an resistance of the closed vocal folds, which pushes them apart, or also which is away from the midline. When the air passes through the vocal tract, it sets the folds into vibration, and due to the elasticity of the folds, it begins to come back, and as the folds begin to close, they form a narrow area that allows air to pass through, which increases the velocity, and then the air pressure decreases and becomes a negative. This is also known as the Bernoulli effect, or the Bernoulli principle. And it then creates a vacuum, and it brings the vocal folds back together, which closes them. And then this process continues to repeat itself during phonation. And last is the question number 7, is to define the mucosal wave and why it is named. So with the mucosal wave, it is a wave-like motion where the medial edge of the vocal folds, they appear to flow laterally across when they're moving, and it creates airflow and alternating pressures within the glottis that separate the vocal folds, and then it brings them together. So when the air is going in and the pressure is building within the glottis, the vocal folds open and close. The vocal folds are blown apart, which means that they abduct, and starting with the inferior margins, and then they come back together with the inferior margins, and it creates the surface wave, which is also known as the mucosal wave. And it is named the mucosal wave because I'm thinking of the vibrations when it moves quickly. It just moves like the mucosal wave. It makes it look like a wave when the vocal folds are moving. And that's my answer for the mucosal wave. And this is the end of my video. I know I probably rambled a lot, but I was kind of nervous and didn't feel like 100% sure of all of my answers, so I kind of stuttered and stopped and looked around. But I hope this was all the information that you needed. Thank you.